The Sunday Times spoils the journalism, much needed journalism of this one by wrapping the newspaper with that unjustifiable, exaggerated solemnity surrounding the burial funeral of Philip. And we shall be talking more about all of this in this edition, which is the part 2. Part 2 of the KHOODEELAARTV channel, broadcasting online from London, not on satellite, not on terrestrial. And for anyone watching this for the first time, this is brought to you absolutely at no cost to you to access this. And this is unique, international, and original. And you won't find this in 1,000. Yes, I'm repeating the term, 1,000 editions of what they claim to be the most widely circulated publication, the Fortnightly Private Eye. We are providing something that is not available on any channel, any platform. And this is the significance of this program. And this item is something that we identify with in principle, the fact that they are publishing anything about Cameron's corruption. And the headline says it all in the context of the kind of royalist loyalty on the part of the Sunday Times. Cameron sought access to NHS data at height of first wave. Now that is a very accurate kind of description, not accurate in the moral sense, but in the factual sense. Actually, accurate description of a criminally active person. I mean, why would David Cameron seek personal data or any data from the NHS or any part of the public services? Now, this should be read in the context of the absolutely bizarre and stupid and dishonest outfits called the Information Commissioner and the local government ombudsman, parliamentary, whatever. None of these agencies, none of these outfits actually work in the context of holding those in government, central government, or in parliament, or in local government to account. And before I move on to a further elaborate discussion, examination of the criminality of David Cameron, I'll talk about one of the MPs, well, 2 MPs from Newham failing to answer questions from constituents. Now, the fatal weakness of electoral democracy as it is kind of suffered in the UK is that the wannabes, that is the candidates who want to be elected to whatever so-called electorally available and achievable posts or positions. Once they get elected, they don't have to do anything to the electors for the benefit of the electors until the next election, which is always some years away, thus giving it a total artificiality, this whole electoral democracy, because the electors who are betrayed and let down and insulted by that process by the elected cannot do anything to stop these elected ones staying on and drawing public allowance and whatever, regardless of whether they ignore the electors' needs and contents and comments. This is the shortest possible description of this corrupt system. So democracy is corrupt by definition. And every democratic country, so-called, is lumbered with bunch of criminals that get in by the votes of the people and then they don't deliver to the people. It doesn't have any exception. Every single country following this elected democracy, so-called, mode or method or whatever the modifications, because some of the arrangements about the counting of the votes and the weightage given to the votes, they differ. For example, one thing is called past the poll. I mean, that is, if somebody gets a simple majority, then they get elected. Whereas the alternative or the other thing that is also on trial is the kind of first preference, second preference, and all the rest of it. But regardless of the mechanical kind of differences, the essential substance is that democracy is a fraud. But even in the fraud, you have to distinguish between general fraud and specific fraud. For example, in Tower Hamlets, you had in May 2014 the so-called election to the post of the so-called mayor. Now that was a fraudulent kind of election from the start to finish. And it's not something that I'm inventing here in this particular statement. It is 6 calendar years since Richard Morey, the election commissioner, published his ruling saying that Lutfur Rahman had got in by fraudulent means. So he benefited from fraud. And he knew that, and he was responsible for that. And it was found that he was responsible and he was guilty, contrary to the provisions and requirements of the Representation of the People Act 1983. That is what Richard Morey elaborated on more extensively than any other act of parliament. And for 6 calendar years, Lutfur Rahman has not been able to overturn the legal statement that Richard Morey made. And to overturn that legal statement or legal position, there would have to be a finding of error in law that Richard Morey had made. And there has been no finding in the 6 calendar years since 23rd of April 2015 that Richard Morey made any error in law. Very significant. Somebody asked me in the days or weeks after the Richard Morey kind of announcement or ruling, somebody who was not necessarily a supporter of Lutfur Rahman but was a member of the electorate in Tower Hamlets and asked me to explain to him the Mori ruling. And I did explain in the short kind of space of time that I had in the street where I was talking to him, street near Whitechapel. And I said that Richard Mori has devoted considerable amount of his report or his ruling so that he could not be readily faulted on the law, and that he had avoided many of the pitfalls that actually plague some of the words contained in the rulings of most of the members of the corrupt judiciary. And I said to the person that questioned me in the presence of a witness that to overturn what Mori had done, Lutfur Rahman would have to be born again, because as Lutfur Rahman had been known to me as a person who had lied to me and lied about me and lied about his role in the council, I knew that Lutfur Rahman could not be a substantial challenger to the law. Of course, there are other aspects of challenges to the law, like I have been challenging the law politically. Politically, because my challenges have been based on the political corruption built in the legal bureaucracy. And my stand is my stand against the corrupt and corrupted legal bureaucracy is of a more substantial, evidential nature and records than all the writers, including Dickens, who have allegedly written about the law and the court system combined, and of course Eric Blair, that is George Orwell. I mean, Orwell, Dickens, and other English writers who have apparently written about the English legal system have not got it right. For a start, they have been absolutely manifestly kind of bourgeois-minded persons. Whether their background's bourgeois or not doesn't matter. Their mentality has been bourgeois-minded, and they haven't had the empirical engagements against the obstructions and obstructive legal bureaucracy that I have been experiencing and conducting. So, as I say about this, Stephen Timms and Lynn Brown, two MPs for constituencies covering the London Borough of Newham, have been sent information about the corruption and the criminality of Rukhsana Fiaz, the current incumbent in the corrupt post of elected mayor. Now, there is no anticipation or expectation in objectively defined rational discourse that one statement would be agreed by somebody else who has been sent the statement. It is up to the person who has been sent the statement to query the veracity, accuracy of the evidence and the suggestions contained or the questions contained. That is acceptable part of the kind of exchanges that take place in a rational, objectively defined rational setting. But with these two, Lynn Brown and Stephen Timms, they don't even disagree. Now, the fact that they don't even disagree doesn't help them. It helps them in perpetuating their own fantasies, that by failing to engage on the evidence, sent to them, made available to them, of the corruption, the dishonesty, and the criminality of the incumbent holder of the corrupt post of elected mayor. They're shielding Ruxana Peel. They're not. Because the more in denial Stephen Timms and Lynn Brown get into, the worse it becomes for them to substantiate any claim, any assertion that they support transparency, they support accountability, and they are against corruption, and so on. So this is just two of these MPs, but the same kind of attitude of complicity, collusion, and capitulation towards the local council can be found in every other MP's behavior. Very, very, very rare occasions apart. So what are these people doing? They're not doing anything to stop crooks like Cameron taking over the government. And what does it mean? It means that although he ceased to be an occupant in a government post, ceased to be an MP, he never ceased to believe that he had a particular exemption or impunity to rob and loot and to lie and to cheat and defraud. That is impunity. It's not without impunity. They have got de facto impunity. When I asked the Parliamentary kind of Information Office as to what legal rights MPs have to fail to engage with constituents on matters of real kind of impact on constituents' lives and rights and demands as against the local council or as against the central government. And the plain answer is that MPs can do whatever they like. That is, I'm saying this. So if you don't agree with this, that is to say, if you don't agree that that is what the Parliamentary Information Officers said, then you can either check with them or you can send any contrary evidence in the usual way to the KHOODEELAAR campaign by following the KHOODEELAAR Twitter account and sending a direct message, nothing else. No kind of argument, no kind of chat or exchange, just the facts. Because you've got so many things to do, there simply is not the time or the interest in getting engaged in diversionary chit-chat. Focus on the absolute substance of the matter. If you believe that you have got a substantial, substantive, evidential item to substantiate any disagreement with anything I'm saying. Otherwise, don't waste your time and send anything that is irrelevant. Only send relevant evidential facts. Now, I have mentioned two MPs, Stephen Timms and Lynn Brown, and both of them have been either government ministers or shadow ministers. And I've met both of them personally, and they don't actually have the material. These are people that are in there in the posts of MPs as careers. That's it. They have no actual vocation, they don't have actually dedication, and they have no real evidence, no record in their histories to show that they've given up anything in order to uphold a principle of importance to people, to society, to humanity. And given the constituencies, both Lynn Brown and Stephen Timms have got mixed constituencies. That is to say, both of their constituencies in Newham have people of different ethnic and religious, cultural backgrounds. So what they have been doing is they've confected a series of CB compliant phrases and spiels, including their availability to go and get photographed with any number of people, with any number of agendas. And that's it. That's what they do. They haven't. Neither Stephen Timms nor Lynn Brown has produced any evidence, and I say this again, any evidence to constitute their relevant work on any issue of contention that constitutes their really telling the truth by risking their curriculum vitae and the inclusion in the list of their achievements. So therefore, when you've got MPs like that, you cannot have anything other than this going on. What Cameron did was to seek access to NHS data at the height of the first wave of the pandemic. Think how fast he was. I mean, some of the pictures that were circulated by, of course, his colleagues who own the media, like Rebecca Brooks. Rebecca Brooks is a very ambitious individual, ambitious as described by Tim McGuire, who is the one that does the Rotten Boroughs column in the Private Eye. I'll check the second name, McGuire, whether it's McGuire or something else, and I shall update that part of the broadcast accordingly if there is a change, a different name. But he remembers Rebecca Brooks from when she was young. And his reference to her included the statement that she was very ambitious. He didn't say she was intelligent or she was ethical or moral or campaigning for the virtuous causes. He said she was very ambitious. Now, anyone who is describable as being very ambitious can be expected to be found to be dishonest, callous, cruel, lacking compassion, and lacking any concern or care for honesty and transparency, let alone for justice. Now, anyone who knows about the Sun newspaper, which we call scum because of its role as scum, would know that the scum as the daily newspaper, not the Sunday version, which is a recent one comparatively. The scum has been one of the two most widely circulated Fleet Street papers in the country to lead the racist cause, the racist hatred, criminality, anti-poor people campaigns, campaign for the legalized robbery by the conservatives in any shape or form. And these two, the scum and the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail group, let's say, have led the popular indoctrination, brainwashing of anti-Muslim kind of agenda. So, for example, Saturday's, that is yesterday's Washington Post, had got maps of the USA showing 6 states across the USA that had witnessed in the last 1 month, not the calendar month, but 1 month, as they say, 6 gunshot murders. We call those massacres. And the total number of people they describe in that particular piece is 40. And we're not including the latest murders of black men by police. I mean, there is no need against that kind of evidence to have to argue for an end to freedom to own guns and against gun trade, because parallel to the so-called license, gun trade takes place mostly without license, beyond license. So you cannot control the ownership of this lethal weapon by any number of people, including the one who did the shooting on Thursday in Indianapolis. He is described as a 19-year-old ex-employee of an outlet. Given the picture, it suggests that he has been quite disturbed mentally. In fact, his mother is included in the report as having said to the police some while before he did the shooting that her son might stage a suicide by police. That is to say, she knew that he would stage a scenario where he would cause the police to shoot him so that the police would be held responsible for shooting him. But that would be the implementation by him of his plan to commit suicide. Now that's an elaborate kind of information his own mother gave the police. So what did the police do to prevent what he did? He committed massacre on Thursday. Could that not have been avoided? In my opinion, on the evidence, it could have been. And yet it wasn't. So that's the norm. It is not necessarily the mother, but it is somebody or something that has got sufficient indications to foresee a certain behavior. And there are enough individuals let loose across the USA who cannot be trusted with a lethal weapon. And the narrative in the media, narrative in the politics has been, still is, mainly in support of ownership of guns. It doesn't say legal ownership of guns. It says ownership of guns. So the United States of America, long before Trump arrived at the White House, has been very badly twisted and messed up. And that has happened before the white supremacists. I mean, as a person of my background and identity, it would be expected that I would be against white supremacists. And I am, but I'm not disproportionately, untruthfully going to blame even white supremacists for something that is not necessarily confined to their particular campaign. it is not exclusively connected with their campaign, I say. And if we bring the narrative back to the UK about state agencies doing the things that the state agencies should be doing to protect people, safeguard people, you can find the same lack of application of the duties and attention. The police, when they are doing objective policing, cannot be blamed for the lunacy of somebody who appears somewhere with a gun and shoots a lot of people. How are the police to know that? They can only be blamed for such activities if the particular kind of perpetrator was clearly known to them. And despite the knowledge, they failed to trigger the range of activities that should have been triggered. In the case of this one, who shot these people in Indianapolis on Thursday, 3 days ago. So society has to have a vigilance round the clock, every minute of the day. If it is society that has to safeguard people, then society has to be vigilant right around the clock. There is no evidence that the US society works in that way, nor that the UK society works in that way. Incidentally, the UK doesn't have a society, because the cabal that Johnson fronts from his base now at number 10 Downing Street, the cabal doesn't believe in the existence of society. Of course, they do. When they need the votes of people, then they do recognize society. And they make all kinds of de facto statements that recognize the existence of society and the, quote, value or values of society. But once they get elected, they don't recognize society anymore, which is what is happening now. Because when Cameron was allowed to do the kind of raids on personal data, very sensitive data and information, that is the core of the actual resource. That information for their capitalist enterprise and the big business operation and the access to the information, so that he could get a role. He could get a role for his employer and user in the grabbing of the billions of pounds that he knew would be made available in the name of society. But the same Cameron perpetrated serial crimes when he was in post as well. He was in post as Prime Minister. Everything about Cameron's body language, the way he looks, everything gives out the message that he thinks that he owns the place. Now that is the mentality of somebody who is deeply disturbed and deeply immoral and deeply dishonest. Doesn't have any respect for people, doesn't have any acknowledgement of anyone's rights, and of course doesn't acknowledge any duties he owes to the people in whose name he occupies any place or makes a raid. Now the fact that somebody so stupid and corrupt as David Cameron can think like that, and he can think like that for as long as he has been allowed to think, is a bad statement on the opposition, so-called ideological opposition and electoral opposition, because there has been no opposition to him. That's the point I'm making here as part of the world exclusive original diagnosis of Fleet Street. Even this one, the Times has Sunak is accused in the Times on Friday, 9th of April 2021, that Sunak pushed the team in his ministry to help Cameron and Greensill. So it's not like Cameron has been the only wrongdoer in all this corruption and criminality and robbery and theft. It's the country's so-called finance minister himself has been shown to have been involved in complicity with the corruption and hijack and the takeover of the Ministry of Finance by Cameron. And the information department in the House of Commons told me, or they told my organization concerned, that MPs were not legally required to answer constituents' correspondence. Think about that. It's not assumed in the normal conversation, is it? When MPs stand up and say, my constituents raised this, so I'm raising this, and they rely heavily on the fact or alleged fact of their constituents' concern about something to validate their claim and representation. And yet, in reality, so the House of Commons Information Office tells me, MPs don't have an obligation to reply to correspondence from their constituents. So this is a country, it's in a banana republic mode. It says, Cameron sought access to NHS data at height of the first wave. Well, I've added the before the wave, before the first. It says, David Cameron lobbied the NHS for access to doctors and nurses' personal data. Think about the seriousness of the crime. According to an email that throws new light on his work for the financier Les Greensill, Cameron, they're giving his age 54, is at the heart of a lobbying scandal after it emerged that he urged ministers to give Greensill Capital access to COVID-19 loan schemes. Now, those data would not be available even to other ministers other than the Secretary of State for Health and Finance Minister. The fact that Boris Johnson is the fronter of the cabal of ministers, etc., is bad enough. But to assume that the NHS, which is at the center of the main kind of spending issues after the surfacing in the UK of the pandemic, and that Cameron moved very fast, height of the first wave, in order to misappropriate the information and the data. So it showed that he was frenetically busy and engaged in robbery and theft, big time. Now, that means that the fact that he could operate like that, and he was not quizzed, he was not stopped, he was not kind of blocked at any stage by any of the persons who held the posts, whatever the kind of platform was, shows that there is no kind of secrecy, there is no security, and there is no safety. When it comes to information data, it is the next thing after the person themselves. It is that important. And by demanding access to those data, Cameron was breaking at least 10 very clear acts of parliament, in addition to breaking conventions, international convention, declaration, and treaty requirements and laws. Remember, all of this happened before Brexit was implemented. So Cameron was breaking so many of the laws that arose as a result of the UK being a member of the European Union. And of course, the international treaties that arise from the United Nations, of which the UK is a member. So how is it that Cameron could invade and make the raids as he did, and he wasn't stopped? By stopped, I don't mean that he was stopped physically from doing that. Of course, I'm meaning that, but not just that. What I'm saying is that even if he got stopped, there should have been immediate outcry. And the outcry should have been caused by the departments, the NHS and the other people involved in the maintenance of the data, raising the alarm as public duty that a big thief has suddenly invaded our space and is busily collecting data that belongs to us. Data is more valuable than gold or diamond, because he didn't ask for diamond or gold. He asked for personal data. So he knew that they were more valuable than diamond and gold, which is the case. So when the Americans appointed, or the kind of Mueller inquiry was triggered about some of the activities of Donald Trump and his regime and his cabal, it was the right thing to do in terms of the kind of due process. Not all the due processes were kind of observed or respected, but those were the due processes, if you like, that were kicked into action. And there is no evidence there is no evidence in that piece that anything similar existed in Britain or exists in Britain. So when I say it's a banana republic, that is what I mean. Say, for example, the disclosures contained in the interview given to the Mirror Group newspapers by Jennifer R. Cooley, who confirmed many of our suspicions. And we suspected very much. In fact, we said more than a year before she confessed that she had had a sexual relationship with Boris Johnson. Now, although it is not expressly illegal to have adulterous relationship, the fact that he was having this relationship with her during the time when he, Johnson, was raiding the resources, that is the kind of links that his holding the public office gave him. That is the resource. Remember? It's the excess. So he enabled Jennifer Arcuri by his resource, by his intervention, to have thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of public money. She was not entitled to even £1, but she has been entitled to nothing. Yet she was given that money. Number one. Number two, she was given access. Arcuri was given access to international events. And thirdly, when asked by a third party, whoever that third party was, or whatever the group of the third party was in the context of that question, people asked about her so-called business. And Jennifer Arcuri said that the person who should be contacted as the contact person for her alleged business was the Mayor of London. That is a criminality 10 times over. He should never, as the incumbent mayor in that elected post, he should never have allowed any such fantasy to be entertained by Jennifer Arcuri. And the fact that she has revealed that kind of detail after she ceased to have any, according to her, contacts with him, but about, that is, covering the period when he was incumbent in the post of Mayor of London. That shows that, like Cameron, Arcuri was able to raid the resources of the incumbent in the post of Mayor of London. And Arcuri repeats her claim that many persons in post during the time of Johnson as in the post of Mayor in the name of London, they had reservations, but they were told not to oppose or ask questions. So it was a brazen criminality and robbery and thuggery that was going on during Johnson's years as incumbent in the post of the corrupt mayor system in London, at the expense of London. So what the Jennifer Arcuri and David Cameron revelations confirm is that there is no government and there is no due process and there is no political opposition in this country. Remember what I've just said? We have been saying that Keir Starmer has politically murdered the Labour Party as an opposition, as the opposition party for accountability. And that is the case. Because when the pandemic money was announced, Keir Starmer actually made a decision. He made an announcement. It's not just his decision to do what he has been doing, but he announced it quite confidently that he was not going to oppose Boris Johnson government for the sake of opposition. And he said that This was prompted by his, Keir Starmer's, conclusion that it was too vital national interest for the government of the day, that is Boris Johnson, to be allowed to do all the public running. And that he, Starmer, was with immediate effect ceasing to act as the opposition. That's what he said. Anyone watching this and not believing what I've said can check the veracity of what I'm saying. If they find that I'm not 100% accurate, then they can send me a direct message through the Twitter account of the KHOODEELAAR campaign. Because the Palace of Westminster, actually has been and is and will remain a palace of complete corruption. Because even the contents of some of the acts of parliament read quite moral because of the provision they have apparently against criminality, abuse, and so on. And the Conservatives and Boris Johnson have been flouting all of these requirements and showing two fingers to the need for them to behave morally, ethically, and lawfully and legally. That is a very serious situation. And we link this to Cameron being the Prime Minister immediately after, of course, the idiotic Gordon Brown giving the opportunity for the Conservatives to win the election. No member of parliament can be legally prevented from speaking the truth. So what stopped the MPs that carry the Labour Party's name from speaking the truth? And what has happened actually in the last 5 weeks? Since Cameron became the feature of the news items. Because one of the things that Labour Party MPs go on and on about is how they are concerned about people losing their jobs. Probably the most powerful weapon in their kind of lexicon is the ability to carrot numbers, peddle numbers of people being betrayed by the Tories. And anyone who wants to check that can look at the records and archives, and it will be absolutely overwhelming, the records that MPs are very passionate, or at least in their acting. They're very passionate when they talk about my constituents losing jobs, etc., etc. So if they want to check this statement that I've made, they can look up and they will find that the Labour Party MPs are at the easiest in the House of Commons or in the Houses of parliament, when they can actually link a particular policy that the conservatives are following to any number of people in their constituencies losing jobs. That sounds absolutely fantastic and very neat, except the fact that when confronted personally, these kind of perpetrators of denial of their duties to hold up democracy and hold up democratic banners of demands disappear. They don't actually use the power and the right that they have to ask questions. And none of the so-called party officials in place in constituencies, including the likes of Tower Hamlets, which has got 2 constituencies for MPs, and Newham, which has got 2 constituencies for MPs. These MPs don't deliver truthful account of what they're doing, or any account of what they're doing, if they're doing anything at all. And this applies to the kind of councillors in place since the election of the 3rd of May of 2018. So where do people who are betrayed by silence of MPs and councillors, where do they turn to get the MPs and councillors to deliver? Nowhere. Which reinforces the need for ordinary voters and the communities to be constantly vigilant about what is going on. Because councillors who, in the case of Tower Hamlets for the last 10, 11 calendar years, have been kind of gagged or bribed by the incumbent in the corrupt post of mayor. And so therefore there has been no councillor making a single comment that is critical of the incumbent mayor in the last 11 years. I am conscious of the fact that the conservative councillors so until the election, there is election time and then the next election, and in between there is no communication between the elected and the electors. Whenever there is election, of course the mode changes and the candidates resume their pretension, and they will use any kind of community savvy language and contacts and communications in order to lure the electors to give them votes again. But otherwise, most of the councillors don't answer phone calls, and they don't actually substantially reply to the questions and communications that they have been sent or are sent. And this applies to all the boroughs, to all the parliamentary constituencies. And because that is how the councillors and the elected ones operate, the electors betrayed by that, are left with no real access. Literally, they cannot access. They cannot contact, communicate to the counselors. And if they can't do that with the counselors, they most certainly cannot do that with the incumbent in the post of the corrupt mayor, both in Tower Hamlets and in Newham. So we go back to what we said at the beginning, that the non-governmental kind of auditing outfits, such as the Information Commissioner and the local government ombudsman, that exist supposedly to adjudicate on complaints against councils. And the evidence available to us of the behavior of these two outfits is that they are not delivering anything like the accountability, the adjudication, the telling off of these corrupt councillors and corrupt councils, let alone the behavior of the corrupt incumbent in the corrupt post of elected mayor. So this banner that is going underneath, the bottom one is carrying the time as 0050 hours GMT. That is not the time. The time is actually 0850 GMT. So this time is 38 minutes since we started. And the culture of corruption of the central government departments, the central government offices, and the local councils extends to the London Assembly, the GLA, the Greater London Assembly. Now, anyone who is new to this broadcast needs a bit of reminder about what the GLA is. The Greater London Authority was created by Tony Blair, but the main active kind of personnel constituting the lobby and constituting the pressure within the Labour Party included Ken Lying Still Livingstone, because Livingstone had used or abused the Greater London Council, GLC, as his private property. And he appointed a series of criminals, his co-criminals, as members of his so-called cabinet. And all of them turned out to be liars, doing the routine lies against the duties of the Greater London Council. And when Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister at the time, found out that Ken Livingstone and his cabal of liars were making too many statements critical of Margaret Thatcher's government, she thought that she would be best advised to scrap the GLC instead of entering into any arguments with them. And she did scrap the GLC. Now, I was opposed to Margaret Thatcher scrapping the GLC at the time, and I still believe that she was wrong. And I don't say that because of any particular affiliation with any political group or party on my part. I say that on the objective kind of basis that London's people need a democratic representation. Now, having said that, the actual problem with the GLC was that it wasn't democratically representative of the people of London. Of course, it was elected in very similar to the way that members of parliament get elected. It was elected to represent all the Greater London boroughs, 32 boroughs in all in London at the current count. And 32 boroughs have got, between 7 and 8 million people? It's more people than the average country in the Western European kind of region. So it's a lot of people, and if a lot of people are affected by any policy, then that policy by definition becomes numerically unavoidable. So, when the GLC was abolished by Margaret Thatcher, whose purpose was to stop it, making her uncomfortable, because most of the GLC statements and claims against Margaret Thatcher's government were based on facts of the behavior of the government. And most of the honestly released position statements by the Greater London Council, most of the statements, not every single one, were nearer the truth than anything the local council office said in reply. And what is happening with the current Greater London Assembly is that instead of being dominated by the cabinet, the mayor system means that there is no need for a cabinet. So therefore, the elected Greater London Assembly members may think that they're important, but in terms of the decisions that Sadiq Khan, the incumbent mayor, makes, the mayor system is not at fault at all. So we shall be looking at the other aspects of the kind of undemocratic behavior of both the Greater London Assembly and how it came to be so undemocratic and unrepresentative after the break of what? In the it was the GLC was abolished, say, in the mid 1980s, and the Greater London Assembly came into being in 2000, I think, or 2001. So 15 years, let's say. And in the 15 years, Ken Lyingstone Livingstone continuously went around London and went through the Labour Party and making the references to the fact that the GLC was the golden local kind of authority that had the welfare of Londoners at heart, and by being scrapped, it failed to help the London people in the way that it was capable of doing and was keen on doing. This was the Ken Lyingstone banner, that something like the GLC should be revived. And he encouraged ordinary people doing the lobbying for him in various councils in London. 32 London boroughs, remember? So 32 London boroughs were kind of told that they would be getting not only the same wonderful thing as the GLC, but that they would get a basic revival of democracy to rival the democracy of Wat Tyler of 1381. Now, Ken Livingstone was a liar, and a grand liar, abuser of the GLC's funds. So when the Tony Blair fronted Labour government came into being, there was a de facto agreement by Tony Blair that there should be something like the GLC created. And so the Greater London Assembly thing was created. I'm skipping a lot of details here. But what Tony Blair couldn't stop was the presence of Ken Lyingstone Livingstone as a de facto embodiment, personification of anything to do with London, of the kind that the London Assembly kind of details, or is a detailed expression of. And this was the beginning of the mayor, the corrupt mayor system being foisted. And when it was made part of the legislation to have a mayor in the name of London, Ken Livingstone became the favorite in terms of the Labour Party members, because he had not stopped campaigning to become himself the King of London for 15 years. So he kept on campaigning. When it came to the election, which was held in 2000, for the mayor post, the nominee who was favorite to become the candidate was, of course, Ken Lyingstone Livingstone. And Blair didn't want him. So Blair did something even worse than Ken Lyingstone Livingstone. Belair picked up Frank Dobson as the candidate. And the fact that Frank Dobson was called Dobson is important here because in my recollection, Dobson was described as Dobson by this former liberal parliamentary press person that came on the racist presented London program during the run-up to the election of the mayor in the name of London. And so Frank Dobson was kind of intended to be the victim. He was going to be taken to the electoral slaughterhouse. And he was slaughtered because Livingstone got the majority and he got elected. And when he got elected, Livingstone set about setting up his cabal of criminals with gusto. And those criminals delivered the criminality that he wanted. Remember what I'm saying, from where we are coming? So the Greater London Assembly, although it was an assembly made up of elected assembly members, became in effect another parliament, in terms of the distribution of the numbers of seats across the 32 boroughs and the numbers of people needed in each of the constituency, each of the seats. So they got elected with roughly the same kind of numbers of votes that MPs got from their own constituencies. But that was the end of the similarities, because the other thing is that the assembly members just kind of sunk, got submerged in the complacent careerist idiocy. And they're submerged to this day, 21 years later. If they were not sleeping, these members of the Greater London Assembly, if they were not sleeping, they would have caught Ken Lyons to Livingstone abusing his position, but they didn't catch him. And because they didn't catch him, somebody else had to highlight some of the most outrageous things that Livingstone was up to. And those outrageous things that Livingstone was getting up to included his attack on this journalist called Oliver Finegold. Now, Oliver Finegold, at the time, was a reporter, or engaged as a reporter on the London Evening Standard. And his job was nothing to do with any contract by him or with anybody. So when the actual details of Livingston's behavior became featured in the evening no standard. Now, no standards is our definition, so it's nothing to do with what they were doing with him. The reporter was Andrew Gilligan. And Andrew Gilligan published a series of exclusive reports about what the Ken Livingstone as the mayor was getting up to. And those reports contributed to Ken lying still Livingstone being considered unfit for purpose. That was during the second 4-year term. Remember what I'm saying? It wasn't the members of the Greater London Assembly. It was a locally based, normally corrupt newspaper called the Evening No Standard. So the Evening No Standard was joined, in effect, not literally, in the narrative that is, by the LBC radio and ITV's London News, Thames London News, and the BBC's London News as well. And one of the things that Livingstone was accused of was that he insulted Oliver Feingold, and this was universally condemned by everyone. And I have been the main kind of campaign action taker, if you like, who condemned Livingstone immediately. Because Livingstone's insulting attack on Oliver Feingold had absolutely nothing to do with Oliver Feingold's question. Because what the question was related to was Livingstone breaking his cool and either swearing at somebody at a meeting, at a gathering, or pushing somebody. One of those two things. And when Livingstone was leaving the venue of that meeting, Oliver Feingold legitimately asked him about how it went. Because, of course, Feingold had been told already before Livingstone left the meeting what had happened. But Feingold didn't let on. He didn't let on as he asked Livingstone what had happened. And Livingstone was, of course, very kind of aware that he would be asked that question, or he would be asked questions about what he had done. And aspects of the question and aspects of the kind of row that Livingstone was involved in shortly before he left and shortly before Oliver Feingold asked him about it, that it was something that would damage him, Livingstone that is. So he lost his composure, either because of that or partly because of that, and partly because he must have had too much to drink or something. Whatever the cause is, Ken Livingstone came across in his attack on Oliver Feingold as a very stupid, intemperate, ignorant, offensive idiot. Because he said, instead of saying the facts of how the event he was at went, he condemned Oliver Feingold effectively for being a Jew who betrayed the Jewish people, by working for the Nazis. That's the summary, the paraphrase version, in my paraphrase of what Livingstone said to Oliver Feingold, which is deeply untrue, untruthful, unjustifiable, corrupt, offensive, and anti-Jewish. Because he was not sympathetic to the Jewish people in that attack on Oliver Feingold. He was trying to abuse one Jew by pretending to be on the side of the perceived Jewish victims of Jewish collaborators with the Nazis. That's what he was doing. Now that shows Ken Livingstone as a very sick individual, because he had no evidence of any of that against Oliver Feingold. Historically, luckily for Feingold was recording all of that, audio record of that. And it was duly transcribed and duly publicized. And within hours, Ken Livingstone was in the swear word I'm excluding house. And Livingstone never looked back. Livingstone lacked and lost significant amount of credibility by that one incident. Why am I going on about Ken Livingstone and Oliver Feingold? Because I'm an investigative analyst of evidence. And I caught that one immediately and I said, that's it. And I shared the evidential discovery with K. Jordan. I had a series of conversations with K. Jordan about the long overdue descent of the criminal Ken Livingstone. Remember, anyone who is watching this for the first time and hearing me about Ken Livingstone for the first time may like to know that I am the person who spent several years, best parts of the working days of several years of my life, doing the hard work and the unique, world-exclusive work of observing the liar Ken Livingstone and disrupting his meetings. And I mean literally disrupting his meetings. And I did disrupt in the most constitutional, lawful way that anyone has disrupted any meetings. I mean, the same instrument that I used to disrupt the late Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and stopped him becoming a hero when he was lying or he was giving me stupid answers. I asked him questions after questions, 9 questions, and I am the one who was the only one who asked Zulfikar Ali Bhutto the questions at his landmark event held in the Institute of Engineers in Dhaka, in then East Pakistan in the late 1960s. And Bhutto was so smug and so arrogant with confidence that he would become the instant celebrity, public figure in East Pakistan. When I asked him the first question, I think he thought that would be it. I mean, he would give me a rebuttal to my question instead of answering my question. And then I would be done for. That is to say, I would have no further question. Well, I did. And it went from 1, 2, 3, 2 up to the 9th question. Anyone watching this, check Bhutto's speech in Dhaka when he visited. That was the only speech. He didn't stay in Dhaka for long after that. Because when he couldn't answer my questions, his face, the complexion on his face changed. And it looked like he was crying. And he stormed out of the Institute of Engineers platform. And off he went to the nearby Intercontinental Hotel where he was staying. Anyone who needs to know the history of Pakistan should read that phase when Ayub Khan had appointed Bhutto as his foreign minister. And at one point, Ayub Khan became suspicious, correctly, that Bhutto was going to outdo him. So he sacked him. And when he was sacked, Bhutto thought that he would do the next best thing to mounting a military war against, or military coup against Ayub Khan, because Ayub Khan, being the military man, had the command of over the military forces. So Bhutto couldn't mount that one. So he thought he would do the next best thing. And he decided to exploit his perceived popularity among the then under 30s, let's say, people who were, in both wings of Pakistan, East and West Pakistan, would simply accept him, coronate him as the people's leader. With that kind of perception, Bhutto arrived in Dhaka, and the venue was selected. The venue was the trendiest venue, the most politically trendy venue of all of East Pakistan, which was the Institute of Engineers. And it was packed. I didn't either have the time or the interest to count how many people there were, but it was packed. And I was only one of the people. And I had gone there purely for fact, not on behalf of anybody else or on behalf of any employer. I had no employer. I went there as an investigative inquirer to see what this character was going to do, say, represent. And I expected one thing, that I would not be the only one to ask him questions. There would be others. But incredibly, I couldn't see anyone else asking any questions, which meant that the engagement between me and Bhutto was so continuous and so kind of riveting that nobody else asked any question. And they couldn't have, because as you can see, I'm engaged with the evidence and facts, and nobody else in the place appeared to be present with that kind of preparation or interest. Because I thought that Bhutto was kind of comparing himself as a better politician than the predecessors. That's where I caught him. I didn't say that he didn't have the right to say that, because he had the right to say that. The only little thing that was needed for him to establish was the evidence. What evidence did he say that? And that's how I proceeded, as I proceed with everything on the evidence. 9 questions, whatever the length of time, and Bhutto was done for. Bhutto was finished for East Pakistan. Now, whether that was the reason, the experience he had with me, whether this had anything to do with his opposition to Sheikh Mujib, I cannot tell. To this day, I have not seen any reference, any connection. But whether it was me or somebody else, the experience was had by Bhutto in East Pakistan, and an East Pakistani gave him the time of his life. I mean, he never, ever, anywhere in Pakistan, that is what is Pakistan now, was treated by another member of the society like I did. I stopped him. That's what effectively happened. So that is the footnote elaborated on to explain what I did to Ken Livingstone. I did to Ken Livingstone 250 to 300 times what I did to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto just one time. And I believe that Ken lying still Livingstone communicated his attitude towards me to his agents and stooges in Tower Hamlets, including quite a few, including Lutfur Rahman, who were given that information that do not let Muhammad Haq into any conversation or anything. That was his appreciation of me. 250 to 300 times to the degree, I mean, comparable to the degree, 250 to 300 times multiplying one time treatment that I gave Zulfikar Ali Bhutto asking questions. I never ever ask a question that is not 1,000 times verified by me, factually, because that would be absolutely pointless and wrong. I have always asked questions based on absolute accuracy and authenticity and veracity on my part on the particular matter. So when Ken lying still Livingstone was parading himself and his cabal as the collected revolutionaries against Margaret Thatcher, that went down well with the criminally minded, ignorant, kind of ingrates to the community, but subservient to Ken Livingstone and his corrupt GLC regime that got money, handouts. One is called Rifraf Ali, otherwise Arif Ali. Now he's from Trinidad and Tobago, and he got probably the most GLC finance for a media operation that Rifraf Ali operated, dedicated to promoting Ken Livingstone and his image, as he would do if he were in North Korea, and promoting the particular dictator at the time in place, any of the Kims. So Ken Livingstone was treated as the North Korean dictator for endless publicity by Rifraf Arif Ali of the Hansip corruption based in Finsbury Park, London N4. So Ken lying still Livingstone, he was of course doing democracy no favors at all. Ken lying still Livingstone, like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 60s, and this was happening in the 1980s, remember? 20 years apart, let's say, 20 plus years apart. Can Langston Livingstone assumed, like all the racists do, and like Zulfikar Bhutto did, underestimate me by wrongly associating me with some stereotypes that from my general background, like my faith, my culture, my language, my area, whatever. But I am not those things. I am above and beyond those things. I am myself, based on my engagement with the evidence of the world, my commitment to the morality and ethics of the world, my absolute dedication to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. But Livingstone thought that I was what he must have thought. He never told me that I was another Bengali. Well, that is completely wrong. I mean, in the current phase, I am a Bangladeshi, but I have been other nationalities. In fact, it is quite possible that I was previously, in nationality terms, I was probably British. But that is something I cannot go into in the broadcast because of the need for documentary substantiation, which I cannot produce in the course of this particular broadcast. But nationality, race, ethnicity are important only in context. They are not the universal, original identifier of an individual, most certainly not of me, because I am ethics and morality, universality, rather than a particular piece of paper of nationality or ethnicity. So, when Livingstone assumed, because I disrupted his meetings by very detailed studies that I had to take and I made, that if I didn't disrupt his meetings, I could not say this thing now, could I? For a start, let's contrast what I did and what the stooges did. They got the money. Rifra Ali got millions, I'm sure, from the GLC, and he became a millionaire, as did other criminals that I've extensively diagnosed and published about in the 1980s in the magazines on articles that I wrote and published. They received the money, and I didn't receive the money. What Livingstone did was to hire at least 4 or 5 or 6 extra security guards. Notice what I'm saying. He hired about 5 or 6 extra security guards to patrol the main building, the GLC building, but essentially to focus on the main task for their employment, which was to stop me entering County Hall, London SE1. That was in the kind of ground floor entrance. Despite the fact that I had an entrance card as a pass to the County Hall, the pass was legitimate because I had been given that pass not because of any party political or campaigning work, but because I was validly a member of the various committees of the Inner London Education Authority. And I needed access to the County Hall. But Livingstone increased the number of security guards who by definition were briefed to behave as thugs. I mean, I'm only one individual. I mean, I don't need 6 security guards to physically stop my entrance. I don't even need one. All I need, if a legally correct and legitimate statement is made to me at the entrance that I was not permitted for whatever reason, I was not going to break the barriers physically. That would not be possible. And secondly, I would never do that because that would not be a legal engagement. But the fact that Ken Livingstone Livingstone's regime thought it necessary to hire as many as 5 or 6 additional security persons, all male, of course, to stop me entering the county hall. Why do I say that? Because every time I arrived at the reception at the county hall, what is called foyer, all of them would appear at the reception. They wouldn't be patrolling the internal parts of the county hall. They would all arrive and they would have contacts with one another. They would be called by the person or personnel on duty at the time of the reception at the foyer. So they would arrive, they would descend, they would rush to the fore of the county hall to stop me entering county hall. Now the only things that were in the inside of the county hall were officers and persons that I would or might have any interest in talking to. So Ken Livingstone did that, but I managed to get into the county hall by challenging them. I think they succeeded in stopping me about a dozen times out of all these years. But I managed to get in by convincing them that they would be committing several wrongs and crimes if they stopped my entry. Once inside, one of the things I did do, not every time, remember it's talking about several years, would be to look at the list of events on the notice board. And more often than not, Livingstone had one or more events listed. I'm giving the facts here. There was no mysterious access to information, secret information, never. And on the evidence of that notification, I would turn up at the particular venue, which is a room mainly on the what used to be called the principal floor, that is the ground floor, because it is more spaces for meetings and committee meetings, etc. And the only thing I would do is not throw stones at Livingstone or swear at him or anything like that. I would ask him a question. And my question, because of the context of the meeting, would be shorter than it could be if there were time, but there were other people, so I had to be aware of the presence of other people. So I would ask the question, the most kind of central core of the evidence or evidence-based question that could be asked. Now, I have found out in a consistent way, all the people that I ask questions of or put questions to, they have got difficulty in answering. This applies to council personnel, council leaders, councillors, council employees. And this applies to various other individuals in government executive agencies. And the questions are about the evidence. The questions have been about the evidence. And the questions have been about the justification for the boastful claims made by the likes of Ken Livingstone, or considerable number of years before I had the misfortune of having to deal with Ken Livingstone. The demeanor and the outlook and the kind of unjustifiable claims ascribing achievements to himself that I saw in Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's opening statement. He made on the stage at the Institute of Engineers in Dhaka in the 1960s. And the same thing applied to the 1970s Prime Minister of India, Morarji Desai. I asked him a question about why, he wasn't condemning the racist attacks on people from the subcontinent, attacks that were taking place in the UK. And Morarji Desai gave a convoluted, tautological statement of idiotic denial. And I used that in a piece I wrote for No Fees, No Money. But I forced Rifraf Ali to publish that one. He published that with a qualification that it's my personal views. Of course it was my personal views, you moron. What else would it be? But I did publish that within a very short time. Desai was mentioned along with the then president of Bangladesh, Ziaur Rahman. And they both attended the Commonwealth Heads of Government in the summer of 1977. And what happened with Desai was that actually completely took away the myths that he had cultivated about himself, around himself. The fact that he couldn't answer my question, and he didn't answer my question, also showed that he was a coward. He was not at all morally at the height of anything. So Ken Livingstone spent millions of pounds, let's say, abusing the GLC and bribing the serial criminals who were publishing outlets containing absolute lies and rubbish, praising Ken Livingstone with no relevance to the actual conduct of the Greater London Council in relation to various communities. And the targeted communities were the ethnicity-linked communities. For example, in the case of Tower Hamlets, he focused on the Bangladeshis. In the case of Southall, he focused on the Indians, let's say, and so on. I mean, the propaganda, that is, not necessarily every single decision affected Tower Hamlets and Southall equally. And Livingstone, I think, although he has been undone by me and a few other people, and have been prevented from getting to be the leader of the Labour Party. I think he planned or plotted a kind of bid to become the leader of the Labour Party. And I think from observing the criminal for a long time, what stopped him from becoming leader of the Labour Party was his dishonesty and his cruelty. Now, I'm not a career political, and I never wanted to occupy a post in the way that Livingstone and others have done. My priority has been always to identify the evidence and tell the evidence, which automatically places me against the side opposite to the self-seeking careerist opportunists of all levels, all backgrounds, nationalities, as I said. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is one background, Morarji Desai one another background. And what we are witnessing today is that Ken Livingstone has been completely kind of busted after his failure to deal with the kind of racists that blamed him for supporting the Palestinians. He failed miserably to come across as an anti-racist. Let's put it this way. And that has become quite clear to the whole population in the UK, if not beyond. And Livingstone cannot sustain and has not sustained his position against that kind of attack. So Livingstone has been undone, and with him has been the idea of the post of mayor, elected mayor, especially in Tower Hamlets, because he invested against the evidence that I identified and I made known and I shared about the fact that Livingstone was a liar. Livingstone was able to recruit a series of stooges in Tower Hamlets on condition that they would be obstructing me at every stage, which they did, because they were operating a conspiracy to deprive the community of the rights that the community is entitled to. So when Eric Pickles issued the statement, on the 4th of November, remember the date? 4th of November 2014, he cited Eric Pickles. Many of the evidence that was floating around against Lutfur Rahman, and he was greeted. Notice what I'm saying. He was greeted by the frontbencher or the spokesperson who spoke after Pickles, who spoke on behalf of the Labour Party in Parliament. So the people that read that response by the Labour Party front bench against Lutfur Rahman were not to be ignored because they were numerically in the main ordinary population. And it was a statement that was long overdue, and that statement did no favors to the identity and the rights of the UK Bangladeshi community. Because if you look up the references in the results on the search, you will see that Lutfur Rahman is described as a Muslim, as a Bangladeshi Muslim. So instantly, his kind of career was put in the context of and against the background of his being a Bangladeshi and a Muslim. So anything he did impacted negatively on the Bangladeshis and the Muslims, which was an impact that was unavoidable. So in January 2010, when I started the main Bangilar campaign against elected mayor system, I was very aware of this happening. It wasn't because a candidate was going to be Lutfur Rahman or somebody like him. It was quite possible, given the demographic composition in Tar Hamlets, that a Bangladeshi would be selected. Whether by the Labour Party or by another party, it would be a Bangladeshi who would be selected. And it is going to be a Bangladeshi next time if the mayor system is not scrapped. So the danger was that if a Bangladeshi got selected, then all the bad things would happen against the Bangladeshi community collectively. And all the good things would be kind of forgotten and overlooked or hidden and denied. Because the bad things that this individual would do would be too many to hide and to kind of overwhelmed by the good things. And the reason is that among the Bangladeshis who are politically kind of on call, let's say, to take part in the canvassing or in other activities related to the voting, contacting voters, getting voters to come to the polling station, or organizing postal voting, including fraudulent ones. Most of these people, and I say that on the record, not because I have any lack of recognition for their independent abilities, but most of these people, on the record, so far as I know at this stage, are not really concerned about morality or ethics. They are concerned about the little interest that they have or Lutfur Rahman has to get elected. And there is no evidence of any recognition that the wider community, the white people and other people who are not Bangladeshis, have any say in somebody who gets elected, like Lutfur did in 2010. And this was repeatedly witnessed during council meetings, so-called council meetings, where noticeable numbers of Bangladeshi, mainly Bangladeshi men, appeared at the so-called public gallery. Now, who gave them the advice or the go-ahead, I don't know. But what they did didn't help Bangladeshi community's image, because they were shouting at mainly white people who were trying to make any point. They were shouting at the Labour Party councillors, but among the public gallery, they were shouting at any white person saying anything. That is the last thing that anyone should be doing. And the fact that they kept doing it, meeting after meeting after meeting, showed that it was Lutfur Rahman who was in charge of giving the program and letting them get away with this. This was completely undemocratic, and it was not representative of how ordinary Bangladeshi people think about white people, because Bangladeshi people think that white people have got the same say, same rights, which is correct, except the small number around Lutfur Rahman. And it shows the extreme unfitness on the part of Lutfur Rahman to be in that post. And that showed the kind of mentality that Ken Livingstone Livingstone had showed to Oliver Feingold. I mean, Livingstone was totally unfit to answer even the timid set of questions at one or two events at the Greater London Assembly. On one, he actually insulted the chair of the meeting, the Liberal Democrat woman who was chairing, and he insulted her. At another meeting, he came carrying, what is it? I mean, do you call it a glass or bottle or whatever of alcohol? Yes. So Livingstone lost it at least 2 years before he lost the election to Boris Johnson, and at least 2 years before he found a kind of revival network based at the East London Mosque, where he must have been kind of processed into a meeting or awareness with Lutfur Rahman. What I am describing are events that are representative of the person Ken Livingstone Livingstone and his contact and his stooge, Lutfur Rahman. So when Eric Pickles gave the speech in the House of Commons on the 4th of November 2014, he said things about Lutfur Rahman that were already public knowledge, if you like, in the ordinary kind of people who were concerned about the behavior, Lutfur Rahman's behavior. But this was not being admitted by the people around him. Remember the distinction. And those who lied for him at various stages lied without preparation, as has been pointed out. Because when he appeared before the election commissioner, Luthuraman heard two of his character witnesses, if you like, or witnesses for him against the petition. One witness being Pola Manzilauddin, who was made a member of the House of Peers, and the other is the person known as the Imam of the Ford Square Mosque in the Whitechapel area, Maulana Shamsul Haq. Now, Maulana Shamsul Haq was openly condemned by Richard Morey, as he was condemned by the representative appearing before Morey by the representative of the petitioners. So here is the reference to Maulana Shamsul Haq. in a blog by Ted Jury. Ted Jury blog is called all one word, Trial by Jury, JEORY.com. And it has got this. Mori concluded Lutfur had enlisted the chair of the Tower Hamlets Council of Mosques, Shamsul Haq, an unreliable witness according to the judge, to secure a letter of support from 101 imams. This letter, Mori said, came amid a substantial body of credible evidence that the imam's message that it was the duty of faithful Muslims to vote for Mr. Rahman. Remember the quotation. Mori said, came amid a, quote, substantial body of credible evidence that the Imam's message, Imams is spelled with an apostrophe after the S, though it's a plural, Imams, that of the Imams, that is, message that it was the duty of faithful Muslims to vote for Lutfur Rahman. Now, Ted Jury goes on to say in the paragraph that follows, Mori considered that his judgment would be controversial, and it is, and I'm sure it is also confusing to those who can't be bothered or who are unable to comprehend it in full and understand the context. That's Ted Jury. And this particular blog item is all Ted Jury trying to make excuses for John Biggs. Now, Ted jury, of course, doesn't dwell on the full evidence that was discredited, evidence given by Maulana Shamsul Haq, because what happened was that when it was put to him, Maulana Shamsul Haq, that he had actually asked people to vote for Rahman. It was a duty of the Muslims. He denied having done that letter that was signed apparently by 101 Muslim imams. Apparently, in the later part of the examination of his evidence, it was stated that a video recording had existed of the same thing being said by him. That was after he denied the first reference to that same thing. Not the video, but the statement signed by 101 imams. So when it was put to Maulana Shamsul Haq that video evidence or recorded evidence, let's say, clearly contradicts his denial. That is to say, it was put to him that recorded evidence proved that he did say what he was denying having said. The answer that Maulana Shamsul Haq gave to that question, which has been paraphrased, was to the effect that if there is a recording that I said it, then I must have said it. Now that is very, very damaging, isn't it? It's not just damaging for Lutfur Rahman, but it's damaging for the whole kind of community, because here was a leading imam of the second most important in terms of numbers and so on, mosque in Tower Hamlets, who was admitting to having lied. And he was admitting in open proceeding, during the taking of the evidence of the election commission that was proceeding with the consideration of the application of the petition by the 4 persons that had petitioned against Lutfur Rahman. Why am I saying against Lutfur Rahman? Because the petition originally had been drafted by including an employee of the council, John S. Williams. John S. Williams had been, for a number of years, the head of the Democratic Services in Tower Hamlets Council. So because of time, we'll just refer to that and not go into all the details about that, because it would be needing about an hour to explain, because it would need the explanation of whole of the council. But although Williams was also petitioned against, in the final ruling, the chair of the election commission, that is Richard Morey, doesn't refer to John Williams as a defendant. Instead, he elevates the image, the name of Williams to a point which is higher than any level that Mori had assigned to any other person that he mentions, even in the positive sense in that report. Now that is proof of Mori's own bias, not in favor of Lutheraman, but in favor of Jonas Williams. And we shall elaborate on that, but except to say this, that the way that Mori describes Jonas Williams, and I'm making this world exclusive diagnostic evidential point, shows that Mori was over promoting, over praising another white man. And that is the impression that is gotten, conveyed in the contents, by the contents of Mori's ruling against Lutheraman. Because although Mori made the positive reference against positive reference regarding Jonas Williams, it cannot be said that he did that voluntarily. I think he was made aware between the time that he received the formal petition that did include Jonas Williams as one of the defendants, and the day that he made that ruling, he must have been made aware of perceptions that might go against Jonas Williams in his ruling, if he gave the ruling against Jonas Williams in kind, if not formally. So therefore, there was the operation of racist influence expressed in Richard Mori's fulsome praise of Jonas Williams. But we are not discussing any details of that other than just saying what I've just said, because it would take about an hour to explain the operation of the corrupt council. And we shall be dedicating an hour to that in another broadcast, not in this one today. Because the evidence that I have of Tower Hamlets Council and of John S. Williams outweighs that of Richard Mori 100,000 times, because Mori doesn't. Mori never knew Jonas Williams, but I did, and I have had to confront him over a number of years with many things that he did wrong. And if Arms Council has been guilty as a council of the bureaucracy, guilty of corruption, systemic, institutional, internal, individual corruption, racism, incompetence, then Jonas Williams is very much typical of the corruption, lies, and racism of the council. I'm comparing this in the context of reference to Maulana Shamsul Haq and Paula Munzilauddin, because both of them were condemned quite straight away by Richard Morey. And he absolutely did not condemn or even criticize Jonas Williams. So I'm saying that the fact that Morey was sitting in judgment of Arms Council was a result, an avoidable result otherwise, of Lutfur Rahman's misconduct, and the misconduct on the part of his so-called supporters. I'm the one who gave Lutfur Rahman systematic advice and warnings. And Lutfur Rahman lied to me systematically, promising on the 29th of October 2010 that he would meet me 2 weeks later. He never did meet me 2 weeks later or at any time about any of these issues. And he cultivated the support of racists operating as left-wingers, both in the racist trade unions and racists in the so-called left parties like the SWP. And those racists and liars remained silent throughout the corrupt years of Lutfur Rahman. And they broke their silence only after the ruling by Richard Morey on the 23rd of April 2015. Richard Morey's ruling was published on the 23rd of April 2015. And today is just a few days short of that anniversary. When Morey published the report, the so-called left-wingers began to condemn him and Eric Pickles. And I'm saying that all the criminals who supported Lutfur Rahman's becoming the mayor remained silent and have remained silent about the severe damage that Lutfur Rahman did to the whole community, to democracy, accountability, and to the Bangladeshis, to the Muslims in Tower Hamlets and beyond. So what we shall be doing is, this is coming up to almost 1100 hours GMT on Sunday the 18th of April 2021. So this is just over 2 hours, I think, we have been on air or online. And we shall take a break here and continue in the next editions.